This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Notorious scammer Elizabeth Holmes was once the youngest self-made female billionaire. Then, in the blink of an eye, her company was worthless and she lost it all, being heralded as, quote, the next Steve Jobs, to now finding herself facing serious criminal charges and decades in prison. Elizabeth Holmes was considered a hero, but when investors started to catch on that she built her empire almost entirely based on a lie, that lie found Elizabeth guilty of 4 out of 11 charges of fraud, wherein she could face up to 20 years in prison when she is officially sentenced. And now the Hulu series The Dropout, based on a podcast detailing the case, is widely spreading Holmes' lies and deception, giving it more publicity than ever. Today we're covering fraudster Elizabeth Holmes. Tomorrow though, you decide. Let us know in the comments down below who you think we should cover on the next episode of Where Are They Now? And please don't forget to like this video so we know to keep producing more content for you that's similar to this. Elizabeth Holmes was born to be a fraudster. Her own dad went bankrupt after being accused of an accounting fraud scandal where they, using accounting loopholes, hid billions of dollars in debt from failed projects and dealings. Elizabeth came from some seriously old money. Her third great-grandfather founded the world's biggest yeast production company, and both her parents were involved in congressional politics and international trade. Holmes herself was creating and selling program-based businesses while she was still in high school. She learned how to speak Mandarin Chinese, and only partway through high school did she already begin attending Stanford University's summer Mandarin program. When she graduated high school, she attended Stanford where she studied chemical engineering and worked as a student researcher and lab assistant in the School of Engineering, all within her freshman year. Her interests lay in laboratory research and medical engineering, and by the end of her freshman year, she was studying SARS. This laboratory research involving SARS sparked an interest in collection of blood samples through the use of syringes. She filed her first patent for an invention she had created, which was a wearable drug delivery patch, and a year later, she took the plunge and decided to drop out of university and use her tuition money to fund her consumer healthcare technology company. The name of this company was Real Time Cures, set to, quote, democratize healthcare. The beginning of her company, she would later state, was inspired by her fear of needles, wherein she became interested in performing blood tests using only a minute amount of blood. When she first proposed the idea to her professor at Stanford, he said it was impossible, but she eventually convinced him to back her idea. She later renamed the company Theranos, a combo of the words therapy and diagnosis. A year after the creation of the company, it had raised $6 million in funding before even releasing a product or prototype. By the end of 2010, she had $92 million. By the end of 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion and had raised more than $400 million in venture capital. Elizabeth was on top of the world. She featured on Forbes magazine as the world's youngest female self-made billionaire, and she featured on the Forbes 400. She was praised for, quote, this phenomenal rebooting of laboratory medicine, for her revolutionary idea of only using a few drops of blood in lab testing. But that's exactly what it was, just an idea. In 2015, a Wall Street journalist was tipped off about the fishiness of the whole operation. A medical expert who thought the experiments were off asked him to speak to a few ex-employees who became eventually whistleblowers. It wouldn't be long, however, before Elizabeth found out about the probe into her company, and she decided to launch a campaign to stop the journalist from publishing his findings. She threatened him legally and financially, but despite her threats, the journalist published the piece. He detailed the company's experiments, how the prototype they were touting around gave extremely inaccurate results, and how the results they had been promoting that came from the prototype actually came from commercially available blood sample machines. Elizabeth Holmes denied all the accusations and called the Wall Street Journal a tabloid. She appeared on television the night that article was posted and stated, quote, this is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. Then the trouble really started for Holmes. In 2016, a few months after the article was published, Elizabeth was caught operating a lab that had faulty equipment and used unsafe procedures. The findings meant that she was banned for 2 years from owning, operating, or directing a blood testing service. Although Theranos appealed the decision, Walgreens terminated their relationship with the company, and the FDA ordered the company to cease making its blood collecting device because it was both dangerous and didn't work. Then the lawsuits started cropping up. Elizabeth's company was ordered to repay all the consumers who bought all of her products in the state of Arizona under false pretenses that they actually worked. She ended up having to shell out $4.65 million to Arizona alone. 99% of Theranos shareholders basically partially backed out, and in 2018, both Holmes and her former president Ramesh Balwani were officially charged with fraud. Now, something to know about Ramesh. Her and Elizabeth had an epic love affair. He is 20 years her senior, and the two had met while she was in college at Stanford. Their relationship was super toxic, however, and Balwani was known as a bully around the office, often tracking his employees' whereabouts and outing them if he deemed them to be too unproductive. Eventually, he and Elizabeth broke up in 2016 when the company was starting to downturn and got into legal trouble, and she pushed him out of the presidential position. A lot of people, once the case had garnered insane media attention, were shocked as to why it had been allowed to go on for so long. A lot of it had to do with how obsessed Elizabeth was with security. She had security guards stay with each visitor throughout the entire time that they were in the Theranos building, and they even reportedly escorted them to bathrooms. She also only signed deals with companies on the condition that they absolutely do not reveal any information about the deal with anyone else. That means that she got to rack up an insane amount of money because companies weren't talking to each other about how much they were giving Elizabeth. So by 2018, Elizabeth and Balwani, along with the company as a whole, were charged with massive fraud by the SEC, and she had to agree to give up financial and voting control of the company, pay $500,000, and return almost 20 million shares of Theranos stock. She also isn't allowed to be a director of any publicly traded company for a whole decade. Despite all this, she stayed CEO of Theranos because it's a private company, but only a few months later, she would step down as CEO on the same day that she and Balwani were charged with 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. All while her company is burning around her, Elizabeth is on social media touting her new boyfriend and new puppy. She's now dating the heir to a fancy hospitality company. And author Nick Bilton posted about it on Twitter, stating, quote, "I personally find it crazy that she's being charged with 11 felony counts, thousands of people's lives were harmed, and she's as happy as can be." Now, after being charged in January and facing up to 20 years in prison, we're not sure when she'll be officially sentenced, but it seems pretty likely that she'll face some amount of jail time, at least if just to prove a point. Her and her boyfriend Will Evans used to live in a $5,000 a month apartment in San Francisco. Although no one's sure where they live now, I can't imagine it's going to be a normal apartment. It's been reported that she and her boyfriend got married in 2019, but no one's really sure because the wedding was allegedly super private, which is very on brand for Elizabeth. Her trials only took so long too because of the worldwide thingy that happened in 2020. Otherwise, she would have been sentenced way sooner given how serious fraud charges are taken in the US. And in 2021, Elizabeth also gave birth to a baby with her boyfriend, so there's that too, I guess. So as it stands now, she's facing 20 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, and is required to possibly pay each and every one of her victims restitution, which could add up to millions of dollars. But we won't know what her actual penalty will be yet until the sentencing, which hasn't been set. So what do you think about Elizabeth's story? Do you think they're too harsh or not harsh enough? Let us know in the comments down below, and while you're down there, please subscribe to this channel to be notified when we post more content. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Where Are They Now? I've been your host Sierra. See you next time.